Hi, welcome to this vlog. My name is Scott Frew. I am the CEO and founder of iasset.com. The idea of these vlogs is ultimately to answer some very common questions I get asked every week nearly that I talk to vendors, distributors and resellers. Given my background is distribution, I decided I'd start at that level. So the sort of questions I get asked are, how would you build or rebuild a distributor to be more successful? To put that in context, both of my last two distributors I grew from nothing. The last one went up to $750 million before I sold them to larger US distribution organizations. The key to the success against all of the other big distributors around the planet was my systems process and making sure that both my vendors who are my customers and my resellers, service providers who are my customers would be more successful. If I made them more successful, by default, we would become more successful as well. So how would I go about building a distributor today if I started again? So the first thing you need to put in place is an ERP system. The ERP system is critical because if you don't know what your numbers look like, you can't run a company. Now that would seem fairly obvious, but there are some companies out there running very antiquated systems or systems that aren't fit for purpose. I certainly have been through that process a number of times over those startups and had to replace systems because they didn't scale. So the first thing is you want to consider what ERP system is suitable for you and your growth that you're going to expect as you rebuild your distribution organization. The second thing, and I know I own the company, but the second thing I do is put an iasset.com platform in. And there's some great reasons that you need to do that. The first one is you need to make sure that every quote that goes out the door to your reseller base has all of the fries with the burger. Now, what do I mean by that? If you are selling let's say a router or a firewall, or let's stick with firewalls, they're pretty easy, you need to sell maintenance with them. Maintenance is a critical component, not just an add-on. Now, if you build a process that says that every firewall must go out with maintenance, and every firewall must have the following options. Do you need hardware replacement, whether yours or a manufacturer's offering? Do you need installation or burn-in to make sure if you're deploying a lot of firewalls for a corporate through a reseller, do they want them all burnt in before they go to market? We've done ones previously in my last iteration for thousands of them deployed all over the planet, but all staged in our environment to make sure that there was no issues once they plugged them in at the user site. Some of them are quite remote, like the Congo. And do you want a configuration assistance, or do you want configuration assistance in that one of the SEs that you employ, if you employ SEs, goes out and helps the reseller install the firewall? Because remember, a lot of the resellers don't have security capabilities, so that's a value add that you can add to that quote. So that's the first thing I do, make sure that all of my quotes had every component on it. And then when you get more sophisticated, we used to sell FlexPod configurations. So that's Cisco, VMware, and NetApp. You would just have to pick how many VMs you needed, and it would calculate out the 200 odd pieces of equipment you would need. In the world of F5, I demanded that the rear rack ears were included on the quote because we knew over time those F5 boxes would bend the front if you only used the front ones. So all these little add-ons, let's talk about Avaya or Mitel or any of the phone companies. When you sell the service, you want to sell the add-ons. So Jabra headsets or, again, installation configuration services. So don't just concentrate on selling the component. Concentrate on all of the pieces that reseller needs to at least consider when selling that component into their customer. That is the first step I would make if I was building or rebuilding a distributor today. And that will, in my experience, that will take your revenues up by 20 to 30% by default. The tough thing for you though is you've got to go to the resellers and say, right, we're going to sell maintenance with everything. Sometimes that's a difficult conversation to have. But again, in my world, I went to the market and said, right, we don't sell anything without maintenance anymore. Now, I lost some resellers, but I gave them the phone numbers to my competitors because the end user needs the maintenance contract up front. There is no excuse not to have that maintenance contract. So as I end this sort of first short, sharp vlog, consider that piece and consider how you're going to do that piece. There are plenty of CPQ systems out there that will replace the Excel spreadsheet that are driving your reps nuts, but they are limited in their own right, and I'll discuss sort of next steps on the next vlog. Thanks for tuning in.